Hi, everybody. I'm going to do something a little bit differently this week with everything that we've talked about over these last 3 weeks, going through verses 13 and 14 especially, and even touching a little bit on 15 and 16 this last weekend. Peter started his letter to encourage people because of both the things they had experienced and the necessity for them to grow up into salvation, for them to grow up into the things that are a part of following Christ. It is not lost on me that we're very busy in our minds about many thoughts. And Ecclesiastes 5 talks about to not be rash with the mouth, to not be hasty in uttering a word before God, that we have an anxious heart and an anxious mind. And the Bible is filled with language about that. And I think that's a part of what Peter's probably trying to get at pretty clearly, is like sober-mindedness and preparing our minds to do something in light of what's been given to us isn't negotiable. We as people, not because the culture is going the way that it is, but the culture is going the way that it is. And not because these are the specific times that we sense that they are, but these are the times that we sense that they are. No, it is because of what God has done for us and because of who we are. That is why we must become who we are to become, individually and collectively. The individual obedience that you yourself on your own need to know about, need to own, need to prepare your mind for action, need to do things, is because you either are or you are not. In fact, like this last Sunday spoke of, living in that old house. You either are or you are not a child of God. And so in verse 14, where it says, as obedient children, he's calling you by name. He's calling me by name, and he's saying, you know who you are. As obedient children, as a member of the household of God, as God's child, live that out. Don't be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as he who has called you is holy, you also will be holy. You shall be holy, since it is written. This is non-negotiable at the heart level. And so what I want to encourage you with this week is, I don't know where your mind is at. I don't know what you're filling your mind with, or how normal things are, how busy your mind feels, but slow down and pay attention to this text. Like, really pay attention to it. Maybe make this one of the most important allowances for you to say no to some time with people, or no to some things that you might normally have in your schedule. Honestly, if you're working out, or if you've got this, maybe say no to almost anything else, probably everything else, until you say yes to sitting down with God in this text and decide and discover, how is God clearly pointing you to aspire to legitimately trust him, to change your attitude towards certain people, your attitude and your need for affirmation from certain people, your need for acceptance from certain people, maybe even your past, maybe even the reputation you hold in your parents' mind needs to go by the wayside, because God doesn't mean as much to you as what they do, or your childhood, or whatever these things are. Sit with God this week, preparing your minds for action, being sober-minded. Set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, as members of his family now, live where you are. You don't live where you used to anymore. So don't concede, don't be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who has called you is holy, you also shall be holy. Be holy, be set apart. Where is God eager and earnestly through the scripture showing you that you yourself individually and as us, as a culture of Christians in our church family, how is God desiring you to be more set apart in the heart, in your mind, in the way that you operate in your daily life? How do you need to concede to be set apart more than you have been? Only you and God, in spending some time thinking about these things, can have the honest prayer to ask God for the wisdom and the strength to release that old address, that old way of thinking, those former ignorances, the passions of your old life, the things you used to give into that you didn't realize you gave into. This is the time. There's a text in Hebrews, don't harden your hearts as some did back in the rebellion, speaking of Exodus 16 and some earlier texts in 17 in the Old Testament, where God's people, he says in Hebrews, and he's repeating Psalm 90, and Psalm 90 is referring back to the Exodus in 16 and 17, where there's this idea of, today if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts like some people did in the past. Do what he says. Don't harden your heart to God's exhortation and his challenge to you at the heart level. Do what he says. Do what he's telling you to do. It might mean reconciling a bad relationship that you harmed. It might mean apologizing and confessing something that you've been holding on to for a long time, that there are relationships in your life that you need to be honest about. There's vulnerabilities that you need to allow to take place. So I just want to encourage you. I want to exhort you. Yes, challenge, but invite. All of these things are in here. Be holy. You don't live where you used to live anymore. So all of those things can unravel now safely into your past. Don't resuscitate the old bag of bones. Be God's child. And that might mean that you were an expert and filled with all kinds of knowledge in certain things in the world, but the reality is those aren't necessarily in this season valuable in your walk with Christ. Walk away. Leave those things. You have Jesus. You have Jesus. So set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, don't be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as he who has called you, and he has called you, as he who has called you is holy, be holy. Have a great week, Church of Main. We'll see you Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.